Hi guys, it seems we're beyond the point of no return when it comes to saving the NHS as a public entity. The Tories have long been working to undermine the healthcare system by not providing it with the funding it needs, and whatever money it does receive is funneled via the NHS into the private sector. The reality is the NHS budget has been growing over the years, but private companies within it have been hoovering up the cash. In steps the Labour Party, who are pretty much guaranteed to win the next general election, and its leader Keir Starmer had this response to a question about privatisation.
Gary Gibbon, Channel 4 News. It doesn't sound like you do want to splash the cash. So beyond your sort of costed extra investment in things like the NHS, you are going to be looking for more from the same money, or more from less even, sometimes in public services. Can I ask you about one specific area of that? Tony Blair looked to the private sector to help with that kind of efficiency saving. Do you think there's more scope for the private sector delivering public services? Have we reached the outer limits of it? Is it sometimes what works? Could there be a whole new development in that under your premiership?
Well, Gary, thank you for that question. The way I see it is this, that if a party wins an election and sets out its stall, its programme for change, it's then got to answer the question, well, how are you going to deliver that? And there are three basic models. One is you suck it all up to the centre and try to deliver it all through the state. I don't think that works, and we won't be doing that, to be clear. The other is to say, well, we've set out what we want to achieve, but it's the market that knows best, so we'll now leave it to the market. I don't believe in that model. I don't think that's worked either. And that's why what I'm proposing today, what we've put on the table, is a partnership model where, with an agile, active state working in partnership with private business, we deliver together, each clear about what their role is in that partnership. And that's the way in which we deliver for the future. But Gary, there's another part to your question which is really important as well, because I've obviously said we're not going to get the big chequebook out, but that is reform. Having run a public service for 5 years, I ran a public service in the criminal justice sector for 5 years. I've long been an advocate of reform, and we have to reform our public services, whether that's health or criminal justice, because the idea that simply putting more money in, which of course is needed and will bring about some improvement, won't transform our public services in the way that I think they need to deliver in the 21st century.
Now, he sort of contradicted himself there by saying that he would not take out the checkbook, but then he said that it needs more funding. Now, I don't know what he means by that. And before I get into a bit more detail about this, I fear that he's resorting to this type of rhetoric in order to keep these marginal seat voter happy. The average person in these marginal seats, they want Brexit maintained. They don't want Brexit undone, or in a sense they don't want to go back to the days of the arguing over Brexit, and this is why perhaps the Labour Party has put Brexit on the back burner in a sense. Once again, it's important to remember that because of first past the post, the message that both parties are transmitting is generally to these marginal seats. So Labour has done its polling in these marginal constituencies and realised, okay, these are the things that are important to these people, and we need to focus on these people, because if we don't, we're not going to win the next general election. This is the sad reality. Now, what he's saying here, the idea that the NHS in particular needs input from the private sector, and you need to have a dynamic government, an agile government working lockstep with the private sector to deliver his goals, that's wrong. You don't need that, because the NHS is not broken. The problem the NHS is facing is a lack of staff and overuse of the private sector. Now, to undo the input of the private sector would require a huge amount of work, a huge amount of investment as well. And maybe the Labour Party don't feel that they have the political capital to achieve that. It would require years, because the private sector is so embedded in the NHS at the moment, it would be very difficult to remove it. Now, I'm an advocate for removing it. I think it should be publicly run. You should not have the private sector involved. There's no reason for that. As we know that since 2010, the Tories have been not providing the NHS with the funding it needs. Yes, the funding has increased, but not to a level where it's needed, not to a level that meets the needs of the NHS. And of course, the NHS doesn't have the staff it needs either. 170,000 vacancies in nursing. And then there's also social care. I'm trying to be as generous as possible, as kind as possible to this. And I'm trying to get my head around why Starmer is doing this. It could be in order to win these marginal seats. These people want the NHS done, in a sense, like get Brexit done. They want to get the NHS done, and they believe that Starmer is the one to do it. And if he's talking about bringing in the private sector to bring down waiting lists, to increase staff levels, then I'm struggling to respond to this, because I know this is not the way to achieve it, but maybe this is going to win votes. And that's the sad reality, that the NHS is no longer going to be a public entity. It's going to be a public-private entity. It's already like that, but the wheels are not going in the opposite direction. Maybe Starmer sees it as too big of a task. It would take too long and it would take too much money. So while he's willing to invest more money in the NHS, some of that money is going to go to the public sector. Some of that money is going to go to the private sector. And maybe this is the sad reality of the situation. But it shouldn't be. It should be a case of going back to the way things were before the Conservatives were elected. Going back to the times when people actually had pride in the NHS, where people had a very high opinion of it. Unfortunately, the opinion is very low because of what the Tories have done over the last 12, 13 years. It's not the NHS's fault that it doesn't have the staff it needs. That's a consequence of the Brexit that was imposed upon it. It doesn't have the resources it needs because of the funding and how the private sector has hoovered up a lot of that money. Sadly, I think the NHS is going to have to go through a number of governments before somebody is going to stand up and say we need to return it to public ownership. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.